I apologize in advance if my voice is a little weak. It is not in its best shape. I guess I've been talking a lot these days. I've been teaching an intensive class and maybe it's related to that. But this video is related to that class. This is a class about war seen from different perspectives. We are reading some classic texts about war, Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, Clausewitz. And then we are looking at representations of war in fiction, novels, movies, and games. And I'm trying to connect the games that we play with the class with the text that we read. For example, this morning we had a class in which first we discussed Sun Tzu's The Art of War, that was assigned to the students for today. Then I divided the class in small groups and each group played Dynasties, the game which is the subject of this video. Then after each group played the game, we reconvened and we discussed how the game can be seen as an exemplification of some of the concepts of Sun Tzu's treatise, how knowing the art of war by Sun Tzu can help you win the game, what is the connection between the two. And connections did emerge. I don't know if that was in the intentions of the designer, most likely because of the theme. The theme is warfare in China during the period of the Warring States. So I guess in this the design did achieve the intent, which I believe was there, to mirror some of the basic concepts of Sun Tzu. So in this game, Dynasties, you have two players that will try to take control of as many lands as possible in China during the period of the Warring States, when China was divided in, yes, large states that were fighting against each other and gradually converging towards what will result at the end in the unification of China. So, you have this, which sounds pretty epic, but in reality this is a fairly abstract design, a very small self-contained game which can be played in under an hour, which can be easily taught even to non-war gamers, and precisely because of this it was perfect for me to include in a class. It could be easily included in a class, and I can tell you that it was a successful experiment. Everybody was able to play the game. I was just going around the groups and checking how things were going, giving recommendations here and there. Everybody enjoyed the game, and everybody did then get to contribute interesting bits and ideas to the following discussion. So this definitely is a game that can be included in a classroom setting, not necessarily a class about history of China, because things can move in completely non-historical ways in this game, but a class in which you're talking about philosophy of warfare. Then I think that there are lessons that can be derived from this game. Also, anticipating some of my conclusions, this is just a very entertaining and enjoyable game that gives you a very broad, pretty abstract representation of war that you can still play in under an hour without a big commitment to learn the rules, and these are, of course, good things. One last thing before I start talking about the game in more detail, telling you how the game plays. This game is being released in a new version right now as I'm filming in Germany at Essen. They are presenting a new version of the game called Sun Tzu. What a coincidence. But I needed to teach the class today, so I used the old version, the original version, which is Dynasties. And copies of the game Dynasties are still available. Maybe now that the new version comes out, the new copies will be even cheaper. So keep in mind that Dynasties could still be a good entry point for you if you want to try this design. Okay, without further ado, let's have a look at Dynasties and the way Dynasty plays. The game is played on a small mounted board representing large states, a rough representation of China during the Warring States period. Each player has a pool of cubes representing army units, and each player also has a set of cards. There are 6 cards with yellow numbers, and the numbers go from 1 to 6, and these cards can be used multiple times during the game. And then there are white cards with white numbers or symbols. They're very powerful, but they can be used only once per game. You shuffle this deck of cards with white numbers and symbols, then you draw 4, you place them in your hand, and you have your initial hand of cards, which will be therefore of 10. Also, at the beginning of the game, you place some of these scoring tiles on the board, completely randomly. You just drop them there. The other ones are not used. These represents the value of the various states in terms of victory points that the player that controls that state will gain when a scoring round comes around. You score every third round, so at the end of round 3, round 6, round 9. Tibet, in this case, for example, will be worth 3 points to the player that controls it during the first scoring round, so in round 3. For the second scoring round, you look at the second number on the scoring tile, third scoring round, third number. And simply, you count the points that each player has. Each point moves this scoring marker 1 point towards the player that scored those points. Suppose we have a player, this player scored 5 points, this one 3. That means that the marker moves 2 points in that direction, because, well, you simply calculate the difference, and the player who has most points gets the marker to move in his direction by that amount of points. Now, during each turn, at the beginning of each turn, you need to plan. Ahead what you want to do. So you choose cards from your hands and you place them face down by the board to indicate what you want to do in each state. For example, I want to spend that card in Xinjiang. I want to spend this card here in Tibet. And maybe I want to spend this card here in Mongolia, and so on and so forth. So you plan all of your 5 cards. The opponent will do the same. I'll do it a little randomly just to give you a sense of how the game may work. And there we go. Great planning. Once both players planned for the current turn, they will reveal the cards that they have chosen for each region. Let me do this. And they will compare the amounts of points that they have. The amount of points that you committed to a region indicates the number of army units that you're trying to place in that region. For example, here for Tibet, white player chose 3 army units and black player chose 2. Once you have that amount, simply you subtract the smaller number of army units from the higher number, and then you remove both corresponding to the lower number. You calculate the difference, and the difference is what remains in there. So 2, you remove these 2, and you also take 2 cubes. Then at the end of this, the white player has 1 cube there. Of course, you simply calculate the difference and add the corresponding number of cubes belonging to the player that has majority. This is what happens if there are no previous cubes on the board. If once you have the difference, it is cubes of a player that already has cubes there, then need to be added, then you simply add the cube. That's reinforcing the control the player already has. But it may be that it is the other player that has cubes there. In this case, 3 for white, 2 for black, then white adds a cube, and then that cube simply removes another cube. In other terms, you keep adding cubes and then subtracting the smaller amount of cubes of one color from the higher until there are only cubes belonging to one player. It may also be that, for example, like it happens here in Xinjiang, that players end up having the same amount of cubes, in which case they eliminate each other and they are removed from from the board, the region remains uncontrolled. This is for cards that have yellow numbers. There can be cards that have higher numbers. The white ones, they represent powerful attacks. Also, there may be other effects. For example, this card is a +1, which means that this card here represents 1 cube more than the opponent is placing there. If the opponent has committed a 3, then this player has played a 4. The player's committed a 7, then this is an 8. Let me show you other special cards. This is a +2. It works like this one, but with 2 cubes more than the opponent. However, then you must discard an army out of the game permanently. 10 is just a very large card. -1 is similar to this one, but it simply means that you're placing 1 cube less than the opponent. The opponent placed a 5. You played a -1, then it means that you played a 4. Plague. When you play the plague, there is no combat happening, which means the card of the opponent is irrelevant, and you simply remove half the armies in the region, rounded down. Very powerful weapon. If the opponent has a large majority, then you thin out that majority. And then maybe you will attack later with an 8, or with a 10, or with a +3. Which is a mighty attack, but forces you to discard 2 armies out of the game. This is for the special cards. As for the regular cards, there are still 2 cards that have interesting effects, which are nevertheless printed on the cards as reminder of what they do. If you play a 1, then you haven't committed much strength to a state for that turn. You can imagine this as you're planning, you're collecting intelligence, gathering forces for future turns. And as a result, at the end of the turn, you will take 3 cards from this deck, you keep 2, and the third one you place under the deck. This is a stronger version of what happens at the end of a turn regularly. Once you have resolved all of the cards, each player will get all of their cards, or the yellow cards, back. They will discard the white cards. Then you draw 2 special cards from your deck, you look at them, you choose one that you add to your hand, and you place the other one at the bottom. So if you play a 1, you simply get to take 3, keep 2, put 1 at the bottom, which is great, but you will go through your deck much faster than otherwise. The card with a 6, this again is a card that comes back to you, but still there are limitations. After you use it, you mark the province where you play this card. Suppose that I play that card in Tibet, then after it is resolved, I take a cube and I mark Tibet. Next turn I use it in Mongolia, then I need to mark Mongolia. So this ties up units that I cannot use for other reasons, and also indicates regions where I may not play this card again. So you may only play the 6 one time for each region during the game. There are optional rules, for example, cards with the commanders. These cards will give you special powers and abilities, but this is the basics of the game. You play through 9 turns, replenishing your hand at the end of the previous turn, committing units, sending units, units eliminate each other. At the end of each third round, you simply look at the scoring value for the scoring round that you're using. The player that controls that region receives that amount of points, and at the end, the player that has the marker on his side of the board is the winner. The game may end early if during a scoring round one of the players manages to bring the pawn all the way to his side of the board, or his side of the scoring track.
So Dynasties definitely is a very enjoyable design. I played it before I introduced it in my class, and I just enjoyed it very much. It is abstract, but, well, there is some thinking that you have to do. There is planning ahead that you have to do. And if you have read or reread The Art of War, you really see how there are interesting connections there. And again, I wonder how many were there to start with in the mind of the designer, how many I'm seeing after the event, but I can see them there and I can use them to exemplify those concepts to my students, to give my students a more direct experience of those concepts. Deception, this is a key idea. The key idea in Sun Tzu. Appear to be strong where you're weak, appear to be weak where you're strong. The power of the cards is relative. A +1 card ultimately will simply allow you to place 1 cube on the board, because it's just 1 more than the opponent. But if you're playing that against a card, a 1 card of the opponent, a card with value of 1 of the opponent, well, you could have used other cards to oppose that. If you just played a 3 or a 4, actually you would have an even better advantage against that weak move of the opponent. But the opponent played a 10 and you have played a +1, then you have counteracted a massively powerful card with a relatively small expenditure of resources. So if you can commit the opponent, force the opponent to commit a lot of strength, and you know that that's going to happen, then you can counteract that with a minimum expenditure of resources. Or you may waste a potentially powerful card against to defend against something you could have defended otherwise. So deception is one thing. Another thing that is typical, that is really key in Sun Tzu's Art of War, is adaptability. Plan as much as you can, in as much detail as you can, and be ready to change your plans entirely. Because the world changes, the situations change, the world is unpredictable. And here you will indeed see that the world of the board changes vastly. You continuously have to adapt to what the opponent is doing, might be doing, maybe planning to do against you. Another thing that is at the core of Sun Tzu is trying not to waste resources. The best battle to Sun Tzu is the battle that you never fight. Second to that is the battle that you fight with minimal loss of resources. Worst of all is the siege, which is the maximum expenditure of resources. Here is the same thing. You can win control over a province by placing all of your armies in a single province, but after all you need is 1 piece. So you just need a relative advantage against the opponent at the right time, time it well, and you'll be able to get that advantage, however minimal, when you need to score, and that allows you to score the points that you need. So you can play in a more wasteful way, run through your deck quickly, and then you'll be in trouble later. You may play conservative at the beginning, but then it may be that the opponent will be able to grab a quick victory. So you really have to balance a lot of factors. For a design that is this simple, for a design that can be played in such a small amount of time, I think that manages to pack all of these decisions, fairly tough decisions, in the game. It's quite an achievement. I find this to be a very enjoyable design, a very successful design. I think it achieves a lot with not much. It is pretty much like Sun Tzu's treatise. It's a very lean text whose depth is immense. It takes a long time to explore it, to understand. And here you have a game that is so small and yet that has a lot of replay value, a lot of decisions, can be played in different ways, and keeps you engaged at every step of the way, because you're constantly responding to what the opponent is doing. Dynasties, a game that you can pick up in various places online for pretty cheap. I think the price will go even lower now the new version is out. I also want to see the new version though, and I don't know, maybe next time that I'll teach the class I will use the game called Sun Tzu instead of Dynasties. As of now, Dynasties worked very well in my classroom. I recommend it to anyone who wants to introduce a quick, simple game with a war philosophy behind it to a class. I think this is great for a classroom experience. If not as a filler, as a small game to play during a game night, a very portable game, one that sets up quickly and can be put away quickly, this is a good choice. Dynasties, I really enjoyed it. A game that is definitely simple, but that when you play it feels more than the sum of the parts and deeper than the sum of its very simple, very straightforward mechanics.